Going on, guys? Midday Garden Report. It is who knows what Thursday, June 1st, and the Celtics season has now been over for 3 days, having lost Game 7 to the Heat Monday. The NBA Finals start tonight, and they're not in it, Bobby. But what they are doing is holding season-ending press conferences that you and I attended this afternoon, early afternoon, where Brad Stevens spoke. And we're going to get into some of that. We're going to play a few sound bites. We're going to talk about the tone of the press conference, what was said at the press conference, not much. And what, if anything, we can learn or glean from, kind of what was said here. Um, and then also there's some good reporting. Many things that we already knew, but report in the Athletic that has some new details, kind of on the behind the scenes stuff that just kind of paint a situation, Bobby, that it was. Let's not get into full blown dysfunction, but let's talk about slightly disorganized, maybe chaotic, maybe uncertain. And I think that's kind of what we're looking at here. I'll let you get a second sneeze out if you want before we get going. But yeah, we're going to get in all of that. We do want to tell you that the show, as always, is brought to you by FanDuel, our exclusive wagering partner here at the CLNS Media Network. Head over to fanduel.com. Take advantage of a no sweat first bet up to 1,000 when you visit fanduel.com/Boston. Now let's get into this, Bobby. And I think two things struck us the most. And you and I are going to agree on quite a few things. I think we'll disagree on some other stuff, particularly regarding Jalen Brown. We'll get into that and his future a little bit later. But the overall tone of this press conference, both in terms of how Brad sounded, his whole kind of, aw shucks, attaboy sort of mentality. We tried, proud of those guys, rah rah stuff that works with high school kids, but not paid professionals. And just the feeling that status quo is the direction that they're going to go. It begins with obviously the return of Joe Mazzulla, which was expected, though we didn't have any assurances prior to the press conference that would be the case. Mazzulla is back and not really expecting to make any major tweaks. Now, again, the latter, Bobby, we don't know. No one's going to come out and say I'm blowing it up. So they could be looking to be aggressive and do a lot of different things. But the general tone was not one of like, we got to fix this. It's unacceptable. We're a championship team and we just lost to a freaking 8th seed. Championship opportunities don't come often and we just squandered one. It was, well, aw shucks, it was a tough season and those guys did their best.
Yeah, and I think what struck me more than anything is how much of a tandem Brad Stevens and Joe Mazzulla are. And I'm not saying that Stevens kept Mazzulla in his position to make himself look better or affirm the decision. But at the same time, I think one of the driving motivators in bringing Mazzulla back here is not wanting to have that look like a mistake. And who knows, maybe down the line here, they end up making a decision in that spot. But some of the things reasons he said, for keeping him aboard there, one, the tough position Mazzulla stood in coming into the year. Brad saying that I wouldn't have been able to handle that spot. And I think a lot of that stuff's true. I think out of the three reasons we heard today, that's probably the most acceptable of all the reasons to bring back Mazzulla, was that he was in a difficult decision. He succeeded for the most part in that spot. And it's tough to put it on him, any of the reasons, whether coaches departing or players coming short or any of those other things falling on him. The other stuff, a great leader, and that's hard to find. I can't speak to that because I'm not in the room and I'm not with these guys or anything like that.
Speak to what particularly?
The leadership of Mazzulla.
And again,
I felt like throughout the season, Mazzulla placed leadership on the players, and especially late in the postseason, it felt like this was sort of a player-led group, taking on a lot of the leadership from Mazzulla. No timeouts, all that stuff. So again, leadership's kind of a vague term, so I'm not going to
it's a strange one, right, Bobby? Because you heard.
But the third one, I want to throw this third thing in.
Go ahead.
Accountable. He said he's accountable, and that's super important. Maybe I'm missing some small moments throughout the year where Mazzulla took accountability for shortcomings or issues or losing streaks or things like that. But I mostly heard defensiveness throughout the season
Sure.
from Mazzulla. So accountability came after game 3 when they fell behind 0-3. He put it all on himself. But that's the other thing I come out of this saying is anyone truly accountable for what happened here? Or are they just all saying it because it sounds good?
Well, here's the thing. We have to be able to parse between what they say and what they mean. Okay. So Joe Mazzulla going out there and being in full defense mode of his play. Even the article today in The Athletic, one of the things said in defense of Joe was what a great job he was doing. I mean, in the sense that holding players accountable behind the scenes when he wouldn't do it publicly, something Ime did. And for us in the media and for fans, that's red meat, right? You're pissed off at the players. You watched what looks like an unacceptable effort. Then your coach goes out there and says it was an unacceptable effort. Those guys sucked. This guy has to do this. This guy has to do that. And you're like, get him. But that doesn't work with players. And Joe clearly, as somebody who's 34 years old with zero experience, was not going to be that guy. Was going to go in there and bash these guys, knowing full well that he needed them and had to count on them to provide leadership and guidance and to also kind of allow him to grow.
That's an important factor too. You did have to keep the team together this year, so I get that.
So I get it. He was in a tough spot there, so he was never going to give us that red meat. But he said he did hold players accountable. So I'm never down on because being defensive with us, with the media, when we're in there asking questions and you guys are in there, I get it. Part of it is I'm not giving this to you. I know what you want me to say. I'm not going to give it to you. And it comes off to people like they're being defensive and don't care or excusing it. I don't know. So again, I have to say, bringing it back to Brad did not sound like he was looking to take scalps after this loss. In fact, he was very apologetic. He was very, kind of giving Joe a pass. He's learning. He's new. This was an impossible situation. I could never have done this myself. And that he said, when you lose like this, people are always going to look at the best players and the coach. And we understand why they do that, but kind of that's not what I'm doing. And I know those guys. And when they go back there and they do their thing and they play poorly, they go back to work. They work hard. They get back into it. And that's what I love about their approach. That's all fine and good. Again, if you're coaching a college or, D3 college or high school, and you're about growth and learning and maturing and turning these people into men. And that's what coaching is to you. Brad Stevens as a coach is about, the life path too, not just, winning titles or, success. At the pro level, it's a little bit different. Accountability matters. Like, yeah, you can be as bummed out that you lost and want to go back and work on it. But if you keep making the same mistakes and over again, at a certain point, we have to accept that it's a you thing, and that's not what I'm getting here. It's that, well, what Brad's looking at it as like, these are my children. What more can I ask of them? I felt like they gave me everything they had. And I don't think fans look at it that way. Fans look at it and say, okay, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. Some people would question whether they did. But even if they did and it's not good enough, then is that good enough? And I think that's where everyone's stuck right now, Bobby, is this good enough? Is it good enough to run it back? I don't care that Joe might learn. I care that, can you afford to give him an opportunity to learn? Those are the things that I think fans are interested in right now is, will this team be able to contend for a title next year if we just kind of keep doing what we're doing? And I don't know how you can say yes. The counter to that will be a bunch of people and say, who else are you going to get? What else are you going to do? Guys, we don't know.
I do think that's important, though.
It's not, though. And here's why. We've learned this lesson. Did we not, Bobby? We went through this with Brad. And you and many others said, who else are you going to get? And then they got somebody who was much, 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 much better, because it wasn't an answer about what you were going to get. It was the problem was what you had wasn't good enough and wasn't working. At a certain point in time, you just have to look at it and say, is this good enough? You can't worry.
We're talking Joe specifically.
You are not, whether it's Joe or the players, if you are not good enough to win the title, what are you doing? Isn't it better to mix it up and take a step back than do nothing and assuredly not win? If you have to reach that realization, though, you have to be able to look deep and say, I don't think with this coach and this core as currently constituted, we can run it back and win. If you believe that, you have to do something, even if the thing you do might be slightly worse, because standing pat is just accepting failure. And I just don't think that people want to see that. So it's not an overreaction to say, do this, do that. It's you're asking them to make a diagnosis.
Yeah.
Are they good enough? And if they're not, then you've got to start thinking about doing things. And honestly, that's where I start with the coach here, okay? So I guess we'll play some of it. Let's play some bites here and we'll kind of dig into it. This was Brad talking about Joe today and just kind of some of the things that he'd said. Let me see if I can find it.
Brad is...
Okay, here it is.
Hey, Brad.
There's Brad. Go.
Joe Mazzulla the best head coach for this team going forward? And if so, why?
Yeah, I think he is. And I thought he, again, did a really good job with this group. Everybody's going to overreact to the best players and coaches after every game. That's always the way it is. We know that going in, so we have to, be able to judge things on the whole. Was he perfect? Would he like to have some moments back? Every coach would. Even the coaches nobody talks about would, right? And we all that have coached know how hard that is. And at the same time, our players, our staff, everybody around him, believe in him, and we got to do our best to, support him going forward.
Throwing this comment up there before we comment on it, because Luis, I love you, buddy, and loyal viewer, and thank you. But this is exactly what I'm talking about. Is better than 90% good enough? Why is this even something that we're discussing? If you think they're only in the top 10 percentile, which means there's a couple teams, 2-3 teams better than them, it's not good enough. Not if you don't think you can get over the top, with small tweaks and small pieces. They don't have the flex. They are running it fully back without a significant move. Fully back. Without there's no draft picks and no new players coming in. It doesn't happen without doing something real. It doesn't have to be Brown and Tatum, but it's got to be Brogdon or Smart or Rob or something.
Yeah.
You got to trade something.
There's a Grant thing in here too that I think let's leave that for later.
Let's leave it for later. But I mean, you're already going to lose Grant most likely, so it doesn't matter. You're actually probably going backwards roster wise. I guess you gain Gallinari. But anyway, just reacting to hearing this comment about Joe here before we get back into the other stuff.
Yeah, you know how I felt. I gave my take after the last game, and if it was my decision, I would look at a different option there. But in terms of assessing the decision, I think if they're fully confident in him, they assessed everything he did this year, they like where he's going, and they think he's the best answer for this group, I can't knock them for that, because at the end of the day, they're going to pick a direction. They're going to pick things that are important to them, and you want someone that's in line with the GM, that's going to carry stuff out, that keeps the players together, and that the players like. My question today, obviously, in terms of scrutinizing Joe, and this was my thing with him all year, was can he get them to the level defensively that they need to be at? And I didn't think they were there this year. And of course, John, in droves, you heard players say they weren't good enough on that end this year. I think we know he can get them where they need to be offensively. It got really rough at the end, and I think there's a lot of reasons for that I think they'll tighten up next year. And will they be that 40% juggernaut to start the year? No, but I do think we look at this offense and say this is a top 2, 3, 5 at worst offense.
What?
But defense.
I disagree.
You don't think there's a top 5 offense?
I'm still going to say it. Offense, like the defense was bad. The offense lost them the series.
And that's
Bobby.
what Brad said today. Yeah.
I'm sorry. It's offense eliminated them 2 years in a row. It did. Even though the defense wasn't great against this team, you needed a more functional offense that the problem, here's where we're stuck, right? Here's where we're stuck on this team. It might not be the coach or the players. It is
right. It's the collective.
It's the collective. Whatever coach comes in wants to do something that involves everyone. because that makes the most sense. You have a talented roster, and they want a more democratic approach to offense that involves pace and ball movement and not running through an alpha per se. Move it quick, get it, do something with it, and go. And it's always, dating back to last year, worked best when they do that. Always. The hero ball, the one-on-one, the hunting matchups, the ISO stuff is a freaking disaster. Yet the two best players on the team default to that naturally all the time. So it's just the thing that they think that they're supposed to do, or the thing that they lean into to try to get out of ruts, is the thing that puts them in ruts.
Right. So as we're focused on the coach, is there any coach that can get them out of that?
So again,
probably not.
No matter what, that's there. You saw it. They faltered. They got a great defense. And so you want to argue this, Bobby, and I think it's a fair argument. Screw it. Offensively, they're always going to be inconsistent because these guys are who they are. This is the roster they have. Their two best players are not terrific with the ball. They kind of play a slow it down approach. Not Jalen necessarily, but he's not a good ball handler and certainly not a guy you want making decisions. Tatum is, but he moves too slowly and kind of takes other people out of the flow of things. So you either just live with it, and nights the shots fall is great. But if we're competitive defensively, they're going to be fine.
Not only competitive defensively, that all-time great team.
So if you want to go back to that, an argument's to be made, because offensively, this team might not be fixable in a way that people want, because it's always going to.
Wasn't Brogdon supposed to be the?
He was, and he would have. And I'm not an injury excuse guy, Bobby, but I absolutely think Brogdon doesn't go out that. How many times Brogdon saved him this year when they did stagnate on offense and he came in and he was.
Yeah, by making ridiculous shot, and he was phenomenal this year with shot making. But I don't think he solved some of the stagnant.
But he's a shot creator. The problem when things go stagnant, you need more shot creators if you're not going to lean into the approach. And Brogdon was a shot creator, which is huge. And Derek White this year became a shot creator. That's what saved them some, Bobby. It wasn't that they played better. They did in the early part of the year, but when they stagnated after those first 26 games, having Brogdon and White be able to create shots that they didn't really have last year when it was all Brown and Tatum, saved that second unit. How bad were they when both Brown and Tatum weren't on the floor together last year? Brutal, brutal, because it was only one option who could score and everybody knew it. So that's what changed. And then occasionally playing that type of style and pace where you would move the ball around and everyone would get their shots up. But I don't think they've got, unless you lobotomize the players and completely change their mentality, I don't know what coach fixes that. I really don't.
I find it shocking today that they didn't, or Brad didn't specifically, address the desire of the players to be a defensive team. That seems kind of incompatible to me, or at least shows a level of disconnect between the players. And it's just certain players. I think it's Brown. I think it's Smart to some degree. I think it's Brogdon obviously came out hottest on this. We need to be a defensive team. And I know you had a different perspective on that, but the coach is involved in that in some way. And especially when you have, and I have all the clips lined up, John, day one at training camp saying we mastered defense last year. Now we can take a look at this offense. Midway through the year saying, the defense, but we set the table on defense with our offense. There were so many moments throughout this year that had me baffled. And they're 20th through November, end of the year. Yes, they're second. They're playing at the highest level. But it was a different style. I mean, they ranked much different, lower in turnovers forced this year. Those didn't start coming until a couple moments in the Heat series where they really ramped up the aggressiveness on that end. And like we've talked about for periods through this year, it was a bend, don't break kind of approach on that end where you were giving up wide open mid-rangers to teams, and that got Young going.
Playing drop and just giving them whatever they wanted. Playing drop and not even the most amazing. It's a mix of philosophy and execution, Bobby. They were playing drop and allowing shots at the rim, which was freaking stunning. The
execution was so bad, and we'll get into that article today, which from The Athletic, where there was a piece in there where they were coming out of timeouts, not really knowing what they were doing defensively, coverage-wise.
Yep.
And I think that reflects this massive regression on that end. And I don't care. I don't know if you have the Brad cut lined up today, but I knew he was going to say
So
it.
here it is, and I have it right here. So
I
again,
knew he was going to say this.
and I tweeted about it immediately and just rolled my eyes so loud. I think I let out an audible sigh in the press room when he said this. I was like, "Come on," because again, this is the old, more for first place more days than the Yankees sort
This
of
is
thing.
exactly what Joe told me all year too.
And this drove me nuts because, again, it kind of goes to the no accountability. Here's Brad Stevens when he was talked about how, well, the team, I believe, was this your question about the defensive identity? Yeah, here it is.
Well, I think the first thing that you have to do is, okay, look at what's true, right? And we're the second best defense in the NBA, right? So something was good too, right? And we were the second best offense in the NBA in the regular season. So that usually portends to give you a great shot. There's no question that Rob's injury at the start of the year and him only playing 35 regular season games made it tougher to be, maybe from a lineup standpoint, what we could be defensively at our most dynamic.
And it was traffic.
And so at the end of the day, I thought that, we had to improve offensively to become better, to compete. And we had to be able to play defense and maintain that level and identity that we had prior to be our very best.
I can't hear.
I'm going to leave that comment up there. Yeah,
and that's what everybody said. Oh, we don't have Rob. Oh, it will be fine when Rob was there in the playoffs, and they didn't even use him. And that was my follow up. Obviously, was why Rob wasn't involved this year. But again, it's a lot. It's like, no, John. How many times did we hear the players say this year? No excuses, and it's traffic, and it's Rob, and it's a lot of excuses, and they all get the excuses lined up. I don't think that was an acceptable answer on the connectedness between the players and the coaching staff.
We watched them in the playoffs. At any point in time, did this team look like either a top five offense or defense?
Yeah, any point to the regular season. Let's look at the playoff numbers. And let me grab them here. Defense, I think, came in at number 10.
10 out of 16 teams in the playoffs was the defense.
So no mention of that. And offense comes in at 4, which of course is below what you were doing in the regular season.
And also, I don't believe it, because it was skewed because of the really good
Atlanta
games.
Series.
Well, some really high scoring games, particularly against Atlanta, who's a really poor shooting team. And then, how many flat out offensive clunkers did you have out of the what? What did you play? 7, 14, and 6, 20 games. Out of the 20 games, my guess is 10 of them were absolute offensive duds, So, yep. Come on.
Last two.
Let's be serious. It's just not it's just not.
It's the same thing Joe did. Picking up the best
If you saw that and thought it's good enough, and again, it's this reliance on what? Are we judging this team based on what the computer printout says you should do before the game, and then what the stats say after?
Or what they look like at their absolute best, which is something Brad talked about today. When we were facing elimination, when our backs were against the wall, we were awesome. And it goes back to the exchange I had with Al after Game 7. The consistency. It is unquestionable that this team was inconsistent. Point to all the awful.
So that's what late
season.
I put my hand up. That's what I wanted to ask, and I didn't get a chance. I wanted to ask there. You coached this team, and now you've had a core. This core together for about 6 years now, and time and again, the team has admitted to these effort and mental lapses in the postseason, in many cases late in the postseason, even the finals last year, conference finals this year. How do you how is that an acceptable thing for a veteran team here to just not be up for games, or not give it maximum effort, or lose focus, or allow themselves to get outworked? Is that a problem? And that's kind of what I'm talking about is stop. Everyone's got to stop humping stats here. Stop telling me. And thank you for that super chat. We will get back to it. And thank you for watching. I just wanted to put it up there so it didn't get lost.
We watch every second of every game, John.
But don't tell me the stats. Don't tell me that. This team repeatedly fails to execute or fails to show up at big times and shrugs their shoulders and say, We just didn't have it.
What was the latest? Was it game 3? Jalen said they didn't have the energy or something like
Oh
that.
my God.
Maybe game 2. You were waiting for it, and it came, and it always arrived
Yeah.
at the end of games. That
They all have them.
comment, and man, yeah, whether it was the Rob or the traffic this year, and those are the big ones that stand out, but there were others throughout the year. The excuses and goalposts moving. Oh, we didn't want the 1 seed anyway. Like all these different moments you look back on and we're like, really? Like, is this what's happening right now? And there was always the notion that they were going to flip the switch and tear through the playoffs. And it looked like it for 2 games, but then you slip up in a few of those Atlanta games. Your net rating in crunch time ends up being -12 in the playoffs. So you have a major issue there. Your defense, again, bend, don't break. It looks good in the aggregate, but then the playoffs, key moments, you get blasted on that end.
Yep.
You have reports coming out through players, it seems, of issues, and Al mentioned it, and Grant, that whole thing went weird all year. That went a little unaddressed today.
Yeah.
So that, like, we could do a top 10 list of issues here, and to come out after the season and your overarching message is, oh, good try. It was tough, but you know, we did pretty good.
Yep. No doubt. And
It's unacceptable.
It's unacceptable. But again, I want to make sure that we do kind of point out it's hard.
And I get it, John. And I get it. It was a good year. You went through a lot. You want to, if your overarching approach wants to be even keeled, let's stay together and let's improve off this. Great. You have to have points you want to improve on. And I know they're probably going through that internally, but your public approach is going to be acknowledge nothing. Everything's fine. We were great. It doesn't work.
But that's the thing. Does it make, and so Brad said this, we'll play the soundbite. Again, we have to be able to, kind of parse between, what he's saying and what might happen, because saying this, like, what are you going to say? There's going to be major shakeups. Yeah, I guess you could say, like, look,
fireworks.
I think you can say, look, everything's on the table. We're always looking to improve. So we have no idea. But what do you benefit from putting all the players on blast, making them feel uneasy? I do think, let me play this. I have a theory for why Brad was the way he was today, and also why Joe was the way he was most of the year. And let me get to that in a second. But first, here's Brad on kind of what's going on with, their idea of, what the team needs and what they're going to do in the offseason.
We'll always look at how do we best, evaluate our roster and make the small tweaks that maybe can put you over the top. Obviously, we're in an interesting situation because I think, again, we're 48 minutes away from, doing our pregame shoot-around press conference today, right? Like in the finals. So there was a lot that went right, and we can't lose sight of that. But we also, are always going to be thinking about how to best move it forward and, pursue what we're all trying to pursue.
And he did go on to say that they viewed it as small tweaks, okay? Small tweaks to the roster, not wholesale changes. But I don't think that means anything. What I will say is this. I believe publicly, Bobby, both Joe and to a larger extent Brad have to go really soft on the players because of what happened with the Ime situation, okay? Right or wrong, whether I'm not here to debate whether the Celtics did the right thing. We never got details. We don't really know. It obviously was something that they felt they had to do. What's very clear is the players disagreed. And what's also clear, given the fact that every single assistant is going to leave and go work for Ime in Houston, that they also didn't think it was that big a deal either, because, or whether they think it was a big deal or not,
they probably didn't know.
Whatever they know, they don't have any sort of moral reservations by leaving here and going to coach with Ime again. They don't think they're going to work for a monster, or else they wouldn't do it. So for whatever reason, he had the assistants and he had the players. Okay. And again, I'm not saying that they're the arbiters of what is right and what is wrong. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is their allegiance was with him very, very clearly. Okay. This isn't a moral judgment. It just appears to be a fact. Those guys were aligned there. So the Celtics, even though they felt they did the right thing, had to approach a lot of this year as we've done something the players aren't on board with. We have created, even though Ime is the one who perpetrated, all of the offenses here and who's the reason why it happened. The Celtics did this and the players didn't like it, and they had to live in that reality of whether or not we did the right thing. The players are kind of pissed at us. And if we go here and we start crapping all over them for lack of focus, looking discombobulated and this and that, when we took their coach away a couple of days prior, and again, felt entirely justified to do so, but they did it and the players weren't down with it, didn't feel they got answers, felt like they got railroaded, felt like they lost their guy. The assistant's probably the same. They leapt down, they went into the second row to grab this guy who leapt ahead of another assistant. They created a situation that was very delicate, and they had to tread very softly around the whole situation because they knew that they did not have the room at that moment in time and possibly never fully got it. So that's, I think, one of the reasons why you hear Brad today still being, because it's like, look, Ime did this to himself, but we did it and we got rid of him and we're going to own it. But I know you didn't like it. And I know it put you in a tough spot. So I'm not going to sit here and trash you guys over it. It was a really tough spot for a team like you to go through to go.
Yeah, and that makes sense given the messaging.
That's how I view it as. They felt they did the right thing, so they don't have any issue with their decision, but they had to face the reality that the players and the assistants clearly didn't agree.
Yes, and you did have numerous players mentioning that, at least the transition. No one questioning the decision or anything like that after the game 7. And of course, at 3-0, Woj is reporting that they never fully recovered from it. But you didn't hear it all year. And especially, like I said, when he got hired by Houston, it was just, it's in the past. This was a long time ago. So is this just another thing that came up as an excuse for the season and something to kind of lean on in terms of explaining what went on here? Because it's hard for me to believe that months and months and months into the season, anyone's even thinking about Ime. Even when things are going wrong, even when you're on losing streaks, like how could you be sitting there saying like, oh, if we had Ime, blah, blah, blah. Because Joe was there. This whole staff was there. It's the same group, save for the guy.
I think they thought this was the beginning of something real. They got their guy. They went to the finals. They were geeked to do this again. They were actually, I think, looking forward to potentially growing as a unit, and then they had it ripped from them. Again, that's how the players felt.
Right. And
without explanation. And they're like, are you freaking kidding me? And while they might like Joe, you think those guys weren't like him? I mean, no offense, Bobby. It's like, the president goes down and you grab like frigging like a Senate intern and say, you run the country. They'd be like, no, even if he's brilliant, like that's insane.
We were shocked when it happened.
It's insane. It's such a reach, Right. So that's the point is the whole thing would have been like, wait, what? So they never got over it. I absolutely think so.
Yeah, it's a factor, but
and no one's saying it's not Ime's fault. I know in the comment people want to say, did they do the right thing? We're not even talking about whether they did the right thing. We're simply talking about the impact it had. It was profound.
Right. And clearly the topic of accountability changed. And you even saw in the core and stuff this year, guys calling each other out, maybe conversations in timeout huddles, things like that. And certainly post-game, you didn't hear the same level of open and public accountability that you did under Ime. So that changed. And maybe that is in response to him leaving. But I don't understand why that would be. And another point on Joe, he came into the job saying he wasn't going to change much. We have a formula, we have a blueprint, and we're going to follow that. And you could name numerous things that ended up changing this year under him. And that's understandable under a new coach. But it's almost shifting back to the Brad approach. And there's some key differences between Joe and Brad you can point to. But overall, it feels like there's a lot of parallels between them. So seeing Brad up on the podium today approaching the postseason presser much the way Joe would a post-game presser this year. And now all the assistants are gone from the Ime era, and your emphases and your system and so much stuff's gone there.
You killed it. You killed it good. That's
It's
it.
all gone.
Yeah, you're back to something else.
You're back to not roster-wise, but coaching-wise, 2020, 2021, where you fell short. You fell short in the bubble. You thought you were better than that Heat team. You had talent. You had injuries, sure. But you fell woefully short in that spot in 6. And in this spot, without a white putback, you're falling in 6. And frankly, you lost the series at 3-0. I know you get back and you fight and you feel good about it, but when you don't even make a dent in Game 7, and I know there was a Rob throwing up and Brogdon hurt and Tatum gets hurt in the first play, that makes it tougher to assess, and I'm sure that's why they're approaching it in a more even-keeled manner than they would have if they just got swept here. But you effectively lost at 3-0, and you didn't show up in those games. You melted down late. Old issues festered. Brogdon admitted that. And the stories that you charged back and came close and it was a good effort, I don't know. It doesn't taste right to me. And I'm not here. I know a lot of fans are furious and they want to nuke everything here. And I think in terms of moving forward, there's a lot more nuanced conversation. But just looking at it and assessing it, you took the same approach to end the year that you did after every bad loss and every losing streak all year. And was that to defend, make up for getting rid of Ime? No, I just think everybody looked at it and was like, we're not caving into this media narrative that we're playing bad right now.
It's so dumb.
It's defensive. It was all defensive, and they ended up being wrong in the end. They weren't a championship team this year.
They were not, and that's the whole point. Is I think that Bobby, you've heard me say this 1,000 times, and I've debated you on it. I don't give a crap how many conference finals these guys have made together. I really don't. You're telling me any of these teams were championship teams? No, they weren't. None of them. Sorry. They're not. So you're telling me if they face the Heat in the first round, they win? No. Also no.
That's a great point. You could have lost against Philadelphia.
You could have lost to Philly, and if you drew Miami, if Miami had beat Atlanta in round 1 and had Hero playing because he got hurt in that first round, you're telling me you beat that team? No.
Who knows? But you ended up losing them anyway.
Bobby,
so
you're
it's certainly
solo for a second. You're solo for 1 second.
Yeah.
I'm getting a battery light. Yep, go ahead.
So it's certainly a conversation whether you would have lost that series or not. But we'll play in what happened here, which was you played great at the last possible moment at the end of the fourth quarter of Game 6 in Philadelphia, and then you pull it out in Game 7. But then you start the Miami series, and you're melting down in 2 crunch times at home, and Game 3 you don't show up. Game 4, it takes you a little bit to show up that night. You get to halftime and you turn up after halftime, and then Game 5's great. Game 6 isn't awesome. You pull it out on an offensive rebound at the end, and then Game 7 you don't show up again. And that, to me, the definition of that is inconsistency. Like you again, I know we're all looking at this in a level of frustration and emotion right now, and they want to take an even-keeled approach to this, but there's got to be some amount of soul searching. There's got to be some amount of looking yourself in the mirror, or at the very least, pointing out things that need to improve. And those aren't things I heard throughout the year from this group. We got to get better at this. We didn't do this great tonight. This is what we got to do the next night to improve this. This is why we lost 3 games in a row. Let's get better at this. We made a mistake here. It happened in spots later in the year, much, much later in the year into the playoffs when things got a little bit more desperate here. But I think habits and the overall approach and the overall messaging within this team just fell a little flat in terms of what they needed. And listen, Joe has to be Joe. He's not Ime. And even Ime, who I think is looked at as perfect now, had his flaws and things where he fell short on too. And let's not forget, in January of that year, everyone was calling for Ime to be out of here. So we're talking so much about the coach. John gets back here. We got to talk about the roster because at its core, I get why they're bringing back Joe, because they believe in him. They believe in his philosophy. They believe in it to grow and evolve. And you You just don't want 4 coaches in 4 years, John. I get that.
I don't.
And I mentioned Monty.
I don't get it.
And I mentioned Monty. I'm like, Monty's out there. There's a chance to go get a guy like that. Maybe he fits this group. And then I see 78 million, and you're eating 14 million. So you're gonna make $100 million coach.
Again,
change.
I don't get it, Bobby. You want my relationship analogies? If your 4th wife is the worst wife, do you keep her just because you just got rid of the first 3?
You giving up $100 million to do it?
I don't know, man. If you're rich, yeah. It's not a matter of that. Here's the point. You're telling me the Celtics organization that these guys talk about what it...
You better be certain it's the coach.
It doesn't matter. That's the price of doing business. Are the Celtics bargain shopping for coaches? That's not real. Like, give me a break here. Shit costs what it costs. That's what it costs. If you had Brad and there were never issues with him, Brad would have been a guy who in his next extension would have been making Monty money. It just is what it is. Like, that's what guys with pedigrees.
But what if Monty's not doing it?
Doesn't matter. That's just when you pay for premium talent, that's what you pay for. Let me ask you this question. Let's frame it this way, okay? If Ime got fired like in May and they promoted Joe, okay, or the Ime thing happened mid-season and Joe gets an interim tag and never extended. And this year, you have your choice between Nick Nurse, Monty Williams, and Joe Mazzulla. Is there a conversation being had? Does Joe even get an interview? Like,
oh, here comes Jimmy. I like this.
What?
Oh, not that
one.
Jimmy,
I'm going to read your statement, Jimmy.
There we go.
Where is he?
He's right there.
What do you mean he's right there?
It's on the screen for me.
You see Jimmy?
No, the comment.
Yes, fine. Yeah, it ain't the wives. We know, Jimmy. All I'm saying is you're still going to change it up. You're not just going to stay there. Anyway.
Right, maybe you do eventually.
Jimmy Toscano prepared a statement that he asked for me to read in full.
Just to wrap up the Joe thing.
Yeah.
If they get some great assistance here, and we obviously have to wait on that, I found it weird today that Brad also said, like, oh, we had a great staff and, we didn't need to supplement the staff. But forget that. If they bring in great assistance, a guy who can really run the defense, maybe another Stoudemire who's a tough talker with the players, and they have like a nice fully rounded staff here of guys who can really support Joe, I'm going to feel okay with Joe coming back. And that's how I'll wrap up that conversation.
Okay. And again, I don't know. He might. Again, my philosophy on coaches, Bobby. Like, I think coaches, I think we overdo it a tad with, their actual impact on the court, unless they're exceptional or putrid. Okay. I think most people live somewhere in the middle. You're telling me Doc ate Joe's lunch all series long? Maybe a little bit. Maybe he did some things, and maybe Joe got the advantage of him and doing a couple things as well. But like most guys live in that middle. You have a few Spoelstras and whatever on one side, and then you have the other end of the spectrum, which is total incompetence / mutiny. Mutiny to me is where you get rid of it. When the players are like, I can't play for this friggin' guy. I know not everyone agrees, and there's that great Pat Riley anecdote where he's like, your job is to effing play, which he delivered to the Heat stars when he put Spoelstra in a very similar kind of situation to Mazzulla in the sense that he was young, not fully proven, and was coaching stars. You guys play, I'll worry about the rest, which is fine. So if they have supreme confidence in Joe and they think growth is there, that's their job, okay? And if the players have not revolted and totally think that he can evolve.
And if you believe in him, why would you just dump him?
If you believe in him, fine. Different story. Okay. So again, I wasn't, but to me it was, if you diagnose, my philosophy with Joe isn't Joe must go. My Joe philosophy is, if you have determined this is the wrong guy and you feel stuck with him because you signed him, you don't want to do the 4 and 4 years. I say, toss that logic. If you believe in him, go forward. If you don't, the rest doesn't matter to me. That was where I was coming from, mainly on it.
And I feel like it's the former because, again, just being around him this year, seeing the successes he had, and again, he's third in Coach of the Year. That happened for a reason, not just because they were good. I think there's some legitimately, not to say he's the next Spoelstra or something, but they see a lot of promise in this guy. This is a guy who's going to be in Utah with Hardy, working his way up there and probably landing somewhere else eventually. Is it the right time, right place? You do have to answer that to some degree here, because this can't be 3 years of learning on the job here when your window is probably that much or shorter. But if you believe in him and you feel like it's going to be much better next year, and you have a full offseason implement stuff, and you have a staff to reinforce him, again, all this talk of the tough situation he's in, as much as this group made excuses this year, that stuff's legit. So everyone wants to blame him right now because it's the easiest target. There's a lot of blame to go around right now, and it's easiest to just say, dump this guy, get another guy.
Yeah.
Who's going to fix everything, and we'll be all right.
I don't believe,
but that's not automatic.
I don't believe he ever should have been put in this position. Ever. I believe a veteran off the street, or somebody's assistant that you could try to talk to and interview, could have been fine. Somebody who could kind of a grown up in the room and make Mazzulla first assistant, and groom him, or something like that. I think that would have made more sense. I think he shouldn't have been in there, and I think he might be years away. Now, training on the job versus training as an assistant certainly accelerates that timetable in terms of readiness. So yeah, his 1 year having to do it is 3 years as a primary assistant probably. So yeah, he may come back in a much better position next year with the benefit of an off season, maybe a little bit of humility, maybe a little bit of, self-reflection. And maybe if he is open-minded, we'll question whether some of his philosophies should be hard and fast, like we shoot more threes or we die, or he starts to kind of evolve a little bit of this thinking. But if he comes back in Coach GPT mode again, even with the benefit of an offseason, I'm very, very concerned that if they just are going to give away to they're going to let you shoot every mid-range two, and the whole offense is going to be let the players figure it out, not call any sets, or you're not getting any sets, not run any actions here. Just let the players drive and kick or drive and get to the basket, put it in the Jays' hands, let them cook, and then try to generate as many threes as possible. I don't like it. So we'll see. We'll see on that. As I mentioned.
Right. And if you just end up pivoting next year, it's like, whoa, you wasted 2 years with this. So that's where again, you asked me, you put me on the spot, Game 7. What do you do here? I move on. That's my decision, because I looked at the threes this year. I looked at the lack of defense. I looked at a lot of the lack of accountability and different things that just didn't seem to drive with this team. Not to mention the players questioning it by the end, and really kind of overtaking.
It's bordering embarrassing that they're saying some of the stuff they were saying, Bobby. He's figuring it out. And
not to mention, after Game 3, he comes out and puts it all on himself, which I guess he had to do, or with the Wick aspect in this story, maybe Wick shocked him in the room into that, or whatever happened there after Game 3. He came out and put it all on himself. And unless that was just fake or something to galvanize the team in that moment, that's pretty.
I want to move.
That's a pretty bold statement.
We could keep going. We got a lot we want to cover. I want to talk about some of the stuff in the report. We haven't talked about Jalen yet, and I know that's going to be a bit of a disagreement between me and Bobby here. And I've done a pretty big flip flop on the Jalen situation myself. I also have that statement from Jimmy I have been compelled to read. So that's definitely going to happen. I do have to say, and I shouldn't have to say this, but I flagged a couple of comments already that I don't like. So again, I just have to lay some ground rules for the people. 99.9% of you guys who are awesome and play it the right way. Lively chatter is great. Disagreeing with people is totally fine. Anything that's even closely racially insensitive, homophobic, anything like that, insults towards one another or direct insults to any host or anything like that will result in blocking at best, banishment at worst. And it's my discretion what we choose to do here. So please keep it friggin' clean. Be civil with one another. I don't want to see any of that in the chat. So please, don't. Don't do that.
Right. And I think, like I've said, John, I said this on Twitter yesterday, there is this atmosphere right now of like fury.
There is,
People
but
are absolutely through the roof furious. And listen, I did not like what I heard at the presser today either. I'm kind of gonna toss the ball to you for a lot of the boomer
do I
rage,
say?
John.
Am I not level? I'm not
No, but I do think there's reason for some anger today with what we're hearing. But this season was not an absolute disgrace, blow it up, disaster. I mean, it was disappointing, and there should be some accountability here, and maybe even some changes. And we'll get into the player stuff right
I
here,
got to
but
move on though. Give me a second here, Bobby. First, I have to tell people again about our sponsor, NBA Playoffs and CLNS Media partnered with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And if you are interested in getting in on the action, as you know, certainly if you reside in Massachusetts by now, you know that the sports betting is legal here in the Bay State. So if you want to sign up, head to fanduel.com/Boston. Take advantage of this special offer, a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. Again, go through fanduel.com/Boston. That's our URL. That's how they know we sent you. And that obviously makes us look good. And again, if this is the kind of thing that you're into and you are interested in signing up somewhere, there's no better place to do it than FanDuel. Really easy to download app. It's super user friendly, being able to navigate whatever you want to do, whether it's game stuff or futures or props or all sorts of cool things. Go check it out. What matters first and foremost to a lot of people, you get paid instantly if you win. If you lose, though, again, you get that no sweat first bet back up to $1,000. That means you can chunk a bet and get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets. Go to fanduel.com/Boston. So, again, this is a long statement. I wish Jimmy just wrote it as an article. So hold on. No, I got it.
Want me to read it?
I got it.
Fire it
Here's
up.
Jimmy. Okay, ready? Jimmy Toscano. This is from a message from Jimmy. I've had a few days to think about the loss, end of season, potential overreaction, and my criticism of the team. And I would like to apologize to absolutely nobody. In fact, I would like to double down after the sad Brad Stevens press conference today. I thought green teamers were the enablers, and yes, they still are, but it seems clear to me that it doesn't start with them. It starts with Brad Stevens. Again, this is Jimmy Toscano's statement, who, by the way, the players tuned out years ago. His remarks today were so typical, made with kid gloves on and a pat on the shoulder to every underachieving Celtics player on this team. Par for the course for this soft bunch, and the reason they tuned him out as a head coach, most likely. There is no accountability, no anger, no fire, just a we're proud of these guys. For what? Stop babying them. Different year, same story. We'll have the same convo next year when it doesn't work. There's a reason the Heat beat your ass 2 out of 3 postseasons and came one shot away from a third time with a lesser roster, because they're tougher and harder when it matters. They play for roster spots, not all NBA honors. The Heat culture that I'm sick of hearing about starts with Pat Riley, who could record scratch every room he walked into. If you want to get the most out of these guys, they need to be pushed, not coddled. They need to be angry, not happy-go-lucky. They need to be dogs, not cats. The same goes with the front office. If the report is true that Wick told the players to grow some balls, which we are going to get into after this, it might be the first thing he said right in a decade. Of course, the team would get butthurt about it. The truth hurts. The more you give these players, the more they'll take. The mental makeup of this roster is weak, and bringing this group back together again is what my good friend John Zanis calls the definition of insanity. Brad, we aren't stupid. We have eyes, and we see what's going on and what isn't going on the court. Fix it, or someone else will. That is Jimmy Toscano here. Right on, Jimmy.
I do wonder how Wick looks at everything that went on these last few weeks here. And we did
Jimmy is
say,
Himmy.
John, when the decision was about to be made on Joe, I think we all agreed Brad would not fire Joe. There was absolutely no chance. And Yahoo was reporting that, Jake Fisher, Brad wanted to give Joe the same support Ainge gave him in 2014. Of course, 2014 isn't 2023, given the situation this team's in. So sitting there watching this today, I don't know if everybody watched it in full, but Jimmy's warranted for feeling the way he he felt. I thought there was going to be a little bit of anger today, John, or a little bit of frustration,
Just
or at
stern.
least a little bit of
It
acknowledgement that
was
this was
so
bad.
surprising. Again, I'm just talking tone. It was so like, I hear what you're saying. It was like talking to a shrink, you know? Like, I hear what you're saying, and I understand your concerns, but we do have to understand that there are challenges many people face that go beyond what we can understand. So sometimes we have to give them the benefit of the doubt. It wasn't, I mean, again, you're not being a jerk saying, again, we have what I believe to be the most talented team in the association. I believe this was a championship team. We fell short of our goals. That's on the players, the coaches, and me to figure out why that is. And
Right, and I want to hear the A word, accountable at all,
and
without
that's
hearing
what we
something like
plan
that.
to do. But that's a simple thing. Like, there wasn't an opening statement. It began with questions. To me, I think you set the tone of the press conference by letting people know, again, it doesn't matter what he says to the media, but we are the conduit to the fans. The fans want to hear that, like, yeah, we mucked it a little bit. Because look, man, I've said this a million times before, and it's why I excuse fans from using the term we. They belong to you. Like, you are there forever. You'll always be a Celtics fan. These guys come and go. They're stewards. They belong to
And
you.
think
So
of the
you
difference.
guys
Last year,
spend money, you dedicate time, energy, effort,
people pay
mental
$1,000 for Game
anguish
7.
because you care deeply about it. It's your team. You want answers and you deserve answers. So when you don't get them, I find that frustrating. I really do. So I think fans should find that frustrating. You want to hear them say, yeah, we should have delivered we should have delivered you guys a title this year. We didn't, and it's unacceptable, and it's on us, and we got to figure it out.
Yeah, and someone needs to diagnose problems and work on solving them. And yeah, I know you think, John, a lot of this is just their media approach and stuff goes on behind the scenes, which I'm sure it does. But it can't be too far from the reality internally that there just wasn't much accountability this year. Legitimate accountability. Like, you go to the podium and say, this is on me, which Tatum did a couple of times, or Joe did at the very end. It doesn't mean a whole lot. It's just something right that you say, and then you move on to the next day, which was this team's approach after awful losses. Just move on. We're not focused on this. We play again tomorrow. Even Smart, who I thought did a great job leadership-wise for a lot of this year. One of the most shocking comments out of this whole past week here was Smart saying, yeah, we'll look at the film and get back into it. And it's like, the season's over. You guys had all year to fix this stuff and take accountability and actually address things. And now it's over. And then he goes on to say, we get a chance to run it back next year. That's the great part. Who was guaranteeing that at that moment? And maybe they looked at who's in charge here and feel pretty good about the fact that this is just coming back in full next year. But to pivot this to the next conversation we're going to have here, after finally talking about the coach for an hour, there's a real case to shake up some of the DNA of this roster and some of the components of it, especially at the top here. And I haven't 100% decided on what I would do with Jalen Brown. This is what I knew, John.
I think I have.
As much as I felt coming into this offseason that Joe would be safe because it'd be Brad's decision and Brad would not fire Joe, if you ask me to predict what's going to happen with Jalen here, I think it could go either way. I think there's going to absolutely be a debate on whether Jalen should be a $50 million player at the top of this team. And there's going to be a lot of messaging. There's going to be a lot of negotiation. There's going to be a lot of debate to make it look like who let this Jalen thing go awry. But ultimately, if they don't bring him back this year, it'll be their decision.
It's a really interesting question. And now Brad played the we can't talk about it card. The negotiating window hasn't opened. The new league year starts, blah, 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 blah. That's when they can start talking extension. whatever, man. He can say whatever he wants to say in regards to we fully plan to do everything in our power to bring Jalen back, but he wouldn't go that far either. Here he was asked a question about a good question. I think this was Chelsea from Channel 7 asking, like, does he want to be back too? Didn't really get answered, but here's what Brad had to say on Jalen, and it's some boilerplate stuff, but we'll have the conversation after.
You mentioned you love your core. Do you plan on offering Jalen Brown an extension this summer, and do you get a sense that he still wants to play in Boston?
Well, I've gotten nothing but had nothing but great conversations with Jalen, but we can't talk about all that stuff, as I said earlier with Grant. Like, I'm not allowed to talk about, the contract details, let alone the extension, because it's not of that time yet. Right now, his window is between July 1st and October or whatever it is. And but I can say, without a doubt, like, we want Jalen to be here, and he's a big part of us, and we believe in him, and I'm thankful for him. And and I said this earlier, I'm really thankful for when those guys have success, they come back to work, and when they get beat, they own it and they come back to work. And so I know that that's what they're about, and that's hard to find. Kind of like what I talked about with leadership earlier. Those qualities aren't for everybody. So. Jalen had a great year, all NBA year. He's a big part of us moving forward in our eyes.
Anyway, a non-answer. It's a this question, Bobby, has a million layers to it. It's will they, should they, will he, and should they? There's three questions we don't know the answer to. Will they offer him a supermax? Will he take it? Should they offer him the supermax? I don't have two of those three. Will they? I don't know. Will he take it? I don't know.
He will take the
I assume so. But what you and I can mainly debate is the should they, because that's what I think it boils down to. If they will, there's nothing we can do about it. If he'll take it or won't take it, there's nothing we can do. It's not worth debating. It's the should they that's interesting. Should they offer him a supermax, or should they look to potentially trade him? This is going to be the number one story by miles, and not just now, of the last decade involving this team. This is a massive, potentially seismic situation, and I don't care how many nice, friendly Brad Stevens press conferences we have. Like, it's real, and they got to be thinking about it, and it's go time. And there is no effing around. There is no. Sherrod and I disagreed about this. There is no. Well, would you take a little less? No, that's a no.
And Zach Lowe has reported that there's not going to be a lot of wiggle room here.
There's no wiggle room. There's nothing there. You're coming with it, or you're making a move, and you got to do it fast. Because if you start shopping him quietly and the leaks start coming out there, it might already be over. So you've got to, like thieves in the night. If you're going to trade him, you field the call or two, and you take a good offer, and you call it a day. That's it. You can't have a long, protracted bidding war. If you think it's a move and you think you have an idea of the package you want, you take a couple of calls and you pull the trigger, or you pony up the dough and you live with the results.
Yeah, and as I said after the last show, I do find it interesting that he's been non-committal to a large degree, and I think you said this as early as that interview run he went on, that a lot of this is probably negotiation, and that makes sense now because they can come in lower than 295, and he, if traded, I think can only make about 200. So it's about $100 million difference we're talking about here. This isn't small stuff, especially for a guy who kind of took a little bit of a smaller amount on his last contract than he probably deserved. So I would think he and his agent, Jason Glushon, probably want every last penny here. So the easiest answer here is that the Celtics want to keep him for as long as they can, not even think about free agency next year, and just figure it out later. And from his standpoint, we want every last dime. We can figure it out later. So let's just do this now. $300 million, boom, on to 2024.
Well, can Jalen wait Can Jalen say no and say, I want to see what happens after this year and still get that Supermax?
What if he gets hurt?
No, I'm saying he can though, right?
Yeah. They can offer him the Supermax right up into the summer.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a world. This is where it gets really tricky. You know, they've now got that card to play. They have to play it this summer, at least to make that offer. If Jalen Brown says no, like, let's see how it goes one more year, you know, they still have that leverage because they can offer it and no one else can. But boy, is it risky because he can just leave.
You trade him immediately.
And I think you trade him immediately. And again, we played this on the night of the game. I'm going to play a portion of it. Jalen Brown talking about his future.
Have you been able to kind of think about your future here and what you're hoping for?
I expected to win today and move on. And that's what my focus was on. That's what my focus has been on. We failed. I failed. And it's hard to think about anything else right now, to be honest. We'll cross that bridge when we get there.
Obviously, you mentioned about the future you guys have ahead. This summer you have some decisions to make in terms of an extension, Boston, if it gets offered. What is kind of your mindset about that this summer, and what are your expectations for how that'll play out?
Say that again.
In terms of the possibility of you getting an extension this summer, especially after making All-NBA, what is kind of your thought process going into the summer, and how do you expect it to play out?
You guys, what's my thought process? I really don't. I don't even really know how to answer that question right now, to be honest. My thought process is, take it one day at a time. Focus on, getting better. Focus on, what the future holds and see where we are from there. I guess I don't really know how to answer that.
So we played that night of the game. It was pretty painful. I never know with Jalen. I honestly think sometimes in an attempt to not say things, he clumsily says more than he wants to, or gives the impression of something totally different than what he actually wants out there. I don't know that pausing and hemming and hawing means I'm trying not to say what I actually think and feel right now. It just might be I'm just trying not to sit here and talk about money and myself and the game and the Supermax. And I don't want to get into it. He's just not nimble enough to duck out of it. So I don't know. What I do know is, I don't know. I don't know what he wants to do. I really don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know that anybody knows. You'll have people definitively in the chat here and on Twitter and everything say, he's staying, he's leaving. And they both are positive. I don't know, man. I have no idea where his mind is at. All I know is no one's ever rejected a Supermax. And if he did that, that would be something.
It would be something. So it comes down to whether they offer it. And that's where things get tricky in the negotiation here. There won't be a negotiation. Celtics could probably make the case that, this new CBA, $300 million is going to be very restrictive to the team. Let's do $250. You can only get $200 elsewhere. Let's do $250. Let's do $270. Let's do $260. Let's go back and forth here. Save some money. Be able to keep Grant maybe. Blah, 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 blah. Jalen's going to look at his second team All-NBA. All these guys make Supermaxes. I should too, and I'm only getting better. And I took money off last time. So there's a real negotiation here that you wonder how sharply Brown will dig in on, because yes, he can reject the Supermax and it would be very surprising. But if it never comes, he's going to want to work his way up to that. But if he's traded, he can only get about 200. So then he loses everything here negotiating wise. So there is a case that the Celtics can leverage him into something here, but he could just say, I'll wait and try to hold them to next summer, as you say. And that's his leverage, that he can go to free agency and not only make a lot of money elsewhere, but also, well, he wouldn't be able to make a lot of money at this point. So The Celtics do have some leverage here, but not a lot. And I do think they'll probably try to enact that leverage, and that's where things could get messy here. Because if they just throw down $300 million, I think the deal gets done. It's almost inconceivable to think that he would reject that. Because he doesn't have leverage to get money elsewhere, John, even if he's traded.
Yeah, I mean, so again, we go round and round on this. I'm not going to lie. My philosophy most of the year was you need the asset. So you need him to make all NBA because that's gonna tie him in. It's golden handcuffs, he's locked in. Nobody walks away from that. And somebody did rightfully put in here. I do think Kawhi walked away in Toronto, right?
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
no, he couldn't sign it there.
He couldn't sign it after that 1 year.
No, you lose the Supermax when you leave your original team.
But he didn't make all NBA there, or that he didn't.
You can't get the Supermax with a new team. He went from San Antonio.
Bingo.
To
So okay, so then that's right.
Anyway, yeah, he passed it up by leaving the Spurs.
He passed it up by leaving the Spurs. Sorry, not Toronto. Passed it up by leaving the Spurs. Anyway, I've been all over the map on this. My feelings on Jalen in general, and my feelings on Jalen and Jason. My feelings on Jalen is he does one thing really well, and that's score. I don't think he makes his teammates better. I think his stats overinflate his actual value to the team. I've always thought so. But when times are tough and you need buckets and he gets them, boy, is that great. I think I've always wanted to make that trade of someone who plays at a different position, because I do like the idea of your two best players not playing the same position. And I've never believed that Tatum and Brown are compatible. Ever, 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 ever. I don't even understand the debate. I don't understand the debate. I don't understand the victory laps people take when they win and say, see? Like, how do you know how it would have gone with a different combination? I don't understand it. Like, it doesn't mean anything. Like, they don't complement each other. And in fact, you've got two guys who kind of need the same thing, which is the ball in their hands, which takes everyone else out of play. And neither one of them can handle it that well. And neither one of them is a terrific passer, though Tatum is clearly on a level beyond Brown. I just don't get it. I think he's a scorer. I think he's a specialist, almost bordering on a specialist. I think you can get 75-80% of his production at at half the cost of what you're going to ultimately end up paying him. I think there's a lot of guys out there who can get you 20 and 21 and 22, and there might be, but you might not have to pay 56, 57, and they totally slot in as, you look at a guy like, I know Kevin O'Connor mentioned a trade like an Anthony Simons. Is he on Jalen's level? No, but if you had him and a couple of other pieces instead of just Jalen, you're telling me that that's a much worse team? I don't know that. But what I do know is that 56 million average that it's going to come out to, or whatever that is harder to trade, because if you're trying to avoid the whole second tax apron and all of that stuff, Bobby, when you trade 50 something million after you do sign the Supermax, if you do decide you want to move on from him in a year, you got to take it back. And that's brutal, because that's going to keep, you're going to suffer the same penalties, but now you're not going to have Brown anymore. So you almost have to do it at 30 million now, or else it's just very, very difficult to do. Then you're just trading 50 for 50 when I don't want this guy and I don't want this guy sort of deals, your Simmons for Harden situations, like that's not good either. That's like dumping. So like, if you're going to get value, I think this is your only shot. And I think you actually missed it. You probably needed to do it last season.
Yeah, and I sort of gauged their fit together in the past, obviously.
And I know people disagree with me like crazy on it, but like, I'm just going to be honest. Like, I would be willing to listen to a lot of different deals, and I'd be willing to say yes to a lot of deals that I bet you Celtics fans would be like, that's the craziest thing. Like KOC mentioned Simons and the 3 pick. Yup.
Yeah, I'm not doing that one.
But I do. Like, that means I would absolutely do that.
You would do that today?
I would. You have to get younger. You need some young, cheap talent. And I would take a hit having less of Jalen to be able to do more with the roster. I absolutely would, because what ends up happening is you are going to be very locked in. I mean, teams don't want to be into this repeater second tax apron thing because of all of the reasons. I know you don't think they're that prohibitive, but also the one where your draft picks down the road get knocked to the bottom of the round. There's some really brutal shit that's going to make it hard to come back from it. They're very, very punitive, And
so you do have to make it.
and in a couple of years, it's going to account for 70% of your salary. You're going to have a really hard time doing anything.
Right. And the way I'm placing it is because all the cap people want to, show that they know the cap right now. And, just use that as kind of, I think, I think
it's an also thing. I've never liked the fit, period. I never have. Now the cap kind of pushed me over. To me, it was like, screw it. What are you going to do? Not sign him? And now I'm like, I don't know.
So I don't want to hear about the cap stuff, because could this team have won the championship this year? Like,
I don't know.
Is there any chance they could have? Absolutely. They were one of the last 4 teams standing. A bunch of guys got hurt in Game 7, and who knows what happens in the finals. They were absolutely a contender this year. One of the last ones standing. So this team can win a championship. You might disagree and say it's unlikely or they're probably not, but there's a less than 0% chance that this team can win a championship right now. And if they did, no one would be saying, the cap, it's going to be very prohibitive. You'd re-sign Jalen and move on and figure it out later. So I don't want to do a bad deal or something that's going to make you worse, or perhaps never get back to this point of contention, because I still think you're right there with this group. Just because you lose your pick in 7 years, or you can't sign a mid-level guy. Like, it's just minor stuff, John. I know it's the kind of stuff that makes it hard to come back from this core if it falls apart, but I think this core is ingrained enough right now. I think Smart and Rob are signed, or, Smart and someone else are signed through 2026. Your entire core is signed through at least 2025. So you have 2 more legit shots at this. You just have to pay. And that was a question before this anyway, is are they going to pay?
I get it.
So the only question that matters is, are Tatum and Brown the guys to do it? You make that decision now. And if you think, judging every available option right now, that Tatum, Brown, and this team gives you the absolute best chance to win, you roll with it.
And Bobby, I'm telling you, because you know me, this is not reactionary from me. What I have said this in the past, what I think the mistake everyone has made in Jalen Brown and assessing his value is this notion that you're going to use him to land a big fish. And I've always wanted to go in the other direction. Use him for a team that's like, oh my God, I want a star, and go get guys.
I can't agree with that. You're worst team at that point.
What deals did I suggest? Halliburton and picks and players, DeJounte Murray and picks and players. You could have done that 2 years ago. Those were my suggestions. You hated them then, Bobby. You're telling me right now you wouldn't be like, oh my God, what a good deal that was, and that they wouldn't be better? They very well could, with flexibility and with assets building into the future. They didn't. They don't. They've always been looking to trade him up. Everyone's saying Dame. Like, what do we know? No. Other direction. You're going to, the whole is going to be greater than the sum of the parts if you make a move because someone's going to say, oh my God, all NBA, I want that, and go get it. But like the guys I was suggesting a couple of years ago, Bobby, Halliburton, Mikal Bridges, and DeJounte Murray, and everyone's like, that's the dumbest thing ever. Well, if you got those guys with picks and parts, you'd be better today. I'm sorry, you would be.
Right, and those guys probably aren't available now. So
they're not anymore. You missed it.
Let's compare all that stuff you mentioned to Durant, which is what I wanted to do.
And again, I wanted Durant only because it was laying on a platter, and it took me forever to get there, Bobby. I flip-flopped on that one like crazy.
So Durant was the move. That was your chance to get ahead on this and upgrade on him. And maybe it took some other pieces. Maybe it would have taken a lot of picks. I get it was a tough decision at the time, but if you were looking into the future with Jalen and saying, I don't know if this guy's staying here, or I don't know if we're going to be able to keep him. It's just so strange to me, though, that all we did all year was campaign and do backflips and say, hey, he's a forward, get him all NBA. And now it's a problem that he needs to make this money. I don't get it. So
guys,
you either like him or you don't.
Everyone's got to kind of, I don't know what it is. It's like everyone just thinks our guys are the best guys. I don't know what the mentality is, but like
so let me explain where
I were on the outside watching Jalen Brown play and I had a different asset and someone's like, would you trade him for Jalen? I'd be like, no, that guy's a mess. Like that guy scores, but I don't want that guy.
Right, but what about the other way around? Like,
I wouldn't want to trade a star for him is what I'm saying. If I were someone else, I would be like, no, man, let someone else make that move. I'm good.
But
you
it's now where they're standing is the opposite, because all those guys you mentioned, they're probably off the table now.
They are,
So
and
the
I don't have the deal in my mind when I'm saying this, but I'm being honest about it. I've always thought his numbers are great.
I think we
he's,
saw that in the playoffs.
and I'm not talking huge differences here. He's not a top 10 NBA player. He's not top 15. You know me, Bobby. I always have him in the 30 to 40 range. Still fringe all-star. That's kind of where he's at. That's kind of what I think of him. But not in the stratosphere people have him in. You know what I mean? Julius Randle made all NBA. You're telling me he's a frigging guy you build around and you want a supermax Julius Randle? Have fun, man. That's not going to be a great team. It's fine. Like, there's guys there that I think he's always going to be on the cusp of the all NBA discussion potentially because of his stats, and he's going to be in the all-star conversation as well because of the stats. They're going to be there. Does he make your team that much better? I don't know.
Right. So
not for all of the pieces you could get or the roster flexibility you could get if you were to have sold it for parts that were good ones.
I don't normally say this, but I do want to hear the deals people have in mind in the chat. I have some and I'll explain the position I'm in right now, because I'm closer than ever before, John, where I do think you actually look at this tandem now and wonder, is this the DNA issue on this team? This tandem, their ability to work together, their ability to lead together in particular. Because I do wonder, given the frustrations Brown talked about during the year, given the way he played, which a lot of the time was downhill scoring and tunnel vision, and the non-committal approach to the team going forward that kind of popped up through the middle of the season as well with the interviews, you wonder if, just from an intangible standpoint, whether saying, all right, Tatum, this is your team now, and we're going to put a bunch of complementary parts around you, and everything's going to be done to accentuate you, rather than trying to figure out this Tatum and Brown thing.
I've never loved the multi-star, the big three multi-star thing. I don't get it.
Well, from a talent standpoint, it makes sense, but at this point, Brown needs to be a complementary player to Tatum based on how they're running this team. And you can argue about how close they are at this point. I think a lot of that argument's probably done based on what Tatum did in the playoffs here. Whereas Brown, I think, struggled in spots, especially the big spot against Miami late, where he gets the opportunity to run things and it's 8 turnovers. And he's trying to figure out how to open up his game all series instead of trying to figure out the offense as a whole. So I do think, not to overreact to one series, you saw some ways where Brown, is he the ultimate complementary piece to Tatum? I think you have real questions about it now. I mean, the on-off numbers, John, 22nd percentile for him. They were worse. And obviously there's lineup reasons for this, but they were worse with Brown on the floor compared to off the floor this year. And a lot of that's the minutes where they just died, where Brown had to run things.
They just die.
Yeah, and so if you're building a team, unless you want to have Tatum play 48 minutes every night, which is pretty much what this team's done for a couple of years here, you need to have someone who's going to run things when he's off, and you would think it'd be your second best player, and he struggled to do it all year. And then in the biggest spot, Tatum gets hurt, and you have your worst offensive night all year with him running the show.
The Heat were salivating for Tatum to go off the floor, and they're like, oh, good, we'll go zone and take a 12-point lead. Like, they couldn't wait for it. They would turn games around in the 4 minutes Tatum was off the floor. It was insane. And I mean, we've seen it all. You saw the turnover compilation from Game 7. Every single time he crossed over to go to his left or tried to go left, he lost the ball. Like, I mean,
not to mention the defense. I mean, the defense is inexcusable at this point. Yeah. So there's a lot of reasons I think you look at trading him. But what's out there? I mean, I've kicked around the Atlanta package, which would probably involve something like, hopefully, Murray, right? Can you get Murray at this point? And then the complementary pieces that
Murray and Bogdan?
I'd go Hunter over Bogdanovich, just because I feel, Sam Hauser, you hope he becomes Bogdanovich. And I know he's probably not that good, but I don't want overlapping pieces. I want a guy who's going to be that perimeter defender, who's going to grow as a great wing alongside Tatum, who is more of a complementary guy than overlapping guy. And then I want that center of the future, which I think is a real question now in Onyeka Okongwu. So I think I've looked at everything, and that to me is kind of the peak of what you're going to get for Brown. Something like Murray, Hunter, and Okongwu. And who knows? I have no connections on the Atlanta side, but it's very possible you turn to them right now and say, would you give Murray, Hunter, and Okongwu for Brown? And they go, maybe just Murray.
Thank you for this comment, because this is kind of where I'm at. It's not hatred. He's a frustrating player. He is, because of the inconsistencies, because of the turnover issues, because of the limitations that for some reason some people choose to ignore. And in fact, say the opposite is happening, that he's getting better at certain things where he's not. But his greatest improvements has just been in making really tough shots. That's his biggest thing. The handle's a friggin' mess. The passing is a mess. Tunnel vision. And his defense is so inconsistent. So he's frustrating, but he's still a supreme talent, being able to do the thing he does best. This comment is exactly what I'm trying to say. I believe you can get better by doing it. I believe you can put together a better team.
It's not Simons and a draft pick, John.
It's not. I mentioned that out there. And I think there was more to that trade, but I've used this expression a ton before. Take one step backwards to take 2 steps forward. I don't mind doing that. I
don't think you can do it right now.
I don't mind looking at OKC and picks and things like that. Like, I don't mind
picks.
Not just picks and players. What I'm saying is, I believe you can supplement enough of Jalen's scoring and have a more complete roster where you're not going to have that second all-star and survive. I believe you can. And I believe that if you start to compile things that are going to build for your future, that you can sustain excellence for much longer. We got to wake up, man. This is Al Horford is 36. Rob Williams is a big freaking question mark. Okay. Brogdon, we know his issues with what's going on. You're going to lose Grant for nothing. Marcus Smart, I'm not saying he's declining, but he's not getting better. Okay. Right now, you're not going to keep doing this with this team for much longer. You're not. You have to. Fans don't get this, I think. Like, GMs typically, or people do to build teams, look at things in long blocks of time. Over 10 years, I want to make the playoffs 9. I want to I want to do this. I want to do this. I want to do that. Sustained success is impossible. It's not all or nothing now and then forget about 3 years from now. You're a GM. You're looking 2-3 years down the road. Yeah. So what if you take a step back? If you take a step back to build a better team for Tatum entering his actual physical prime, that's bad.
Yes,
but it's totally not. In fact, you should be taking a hard look at this organization and saying, I don't know if running it back gets me there, but I do think if I start to make moves now in 2 years, I can build the team I want around Jason Tatum. If that's what you decide, that's going to be better. That's going to give me another 4 or 5 year window here, because I don't think I've got it right now. That's right, smart management.
Listen, John, if you could look right now and say, let's force a trade that's going to make us more sustainable, younger, still competitive at the highest level, and then eventually get to that point where you win a championship. Great. Yeah. Like, I think anyone who looks at the situation right now would say, let's do that. But there's too much uncertainty. You make a move like the Murray move I mentioned, and you end up much worse, and there's no trajectory, and then you have to sign those guys down the line, and maybe you lose a guy, and it's going to be just as expensive if you're re-signing certain guys who are coming back. So you always want something different. You always want to shake it up, especially when you lose, but you might make things worse. And I know it's your point on the coach, John, was right when it came to Stevens, and I looked at it like that. But when you look at the talent on the roster, if you make yourself worse, you're just worse. And if it doesn't get better, yes, I think there's a case to make things more complementary and sustainable around Tatum, because you look at Tatum and say, this guy's going to be here for a long, long time, and he's going to continue to get better. I think the most overarching thing you look at in terms of their championship window is that you're not legitimately going to be a champion until Tatum gets to 26, 27, because that's when guys realistically win championships. But if you make yourself worse in that time span, all of a sudden Tatum's going to be sitting back saying, is this the place for me? Because like I said earlier this year, losing Brown for nothing is the beginning of the end of Tatum.
I know, and I know this is going to trigger people, but it's a really interesting convo, and I don't think it's black and white here. I think it is a very nuanced discussion.
At least if you lock in Brown, John, and I do agree with you. I said it the other day. It's going to be harder to move Brown down the line if you lock him.
It is.
50 million.
It's 100% going to be harder. And again,
but at least you don't lose him for nothing.
I blame myself for not having kind of seen it all the way through, because to me, it's like you make the trade. Yeah, maybe you do, but you're going to be taking less. You're going to be taking on bad contracts. You're going to be doing things that are going to keep you in that repeater tax, second apron situation. That's not going to be great for team building. So you got to kind of live with that. I did want to move on a couple other things. We don't really have as much time as I was hoping, but it is a little bit interesting. A couple of things we talked about, the report that we discussed here. Among the things that happened, Wick Grousbeck tore into the team after a Game 3 loss in Miami, which is really interesting. Oh, man, would I love to see that. Went in there and ripped him a new you-know-what. Other issues that the players had to basically implore Joe Mazzulla to reinsert Grant Williams into the rotation. Among the different things that were talked about in the report.
By the way, I thought it might have been the opposite, just assuming. So this is on Brad and Joe, the Grant thing, if this is true.
Yeah. So a couple things that just kind of showed that Joe was very much, and, coming out of defensive things, and, I think it was recognized by all that Joe needed some help. I think they did it, and I don't think they did it in a way that they were like pissed about it. But we don't have a ton of time to get into this stuff. I did want to mention it because it was somewhat interesting. You guys can check that out if you have an Athletic subscription. Good reporting there, just some of the behind the scenes stuff. We are going to wrap. I do want to say again, check out FanDuel if you want to sign up with a sports book. FanDuel is the one to go to. I tell you that. There's no questions asked. It's clearly the best choice. If you want to sign up, go to fanduel.com/Boston and take advantage of this deal. No sweat, first bet up to $1,000. It's the number one sportsbook in America for a reason. Terrific app. Very easy to kind of follow along with what's going on. You get paid instantly. And in addition to this offer, every time you're on there, there's special promotions they're running all the time that let you get in on the action and have some fun. So again, check that out if you're interested in it. Bobby, we are going to wrap it, but we're going to have more Garden Report coverage, we promise, throughout the offseason here. NBA Finals tonight. We may be talking a little bit about that as time goes on, but really our attention here is focused on the Celtics. Jalen stuff, that's going to start moving in a month. So we've got a little bit of downtime, but I'm curious what other reports and what other things kind of trickle out between now and then, Bobby. So we'll be back here to talk to you guys a little bit later. Any closing thoughts before we wrap it here?
Yeah, I'll wrap it on the Jalen point. Like I said, where I sit on this right now is if you want to move him, you're fully justified to at this point. I think there are numerous cases for doing it, but I just don't want to hear about the money. If money's the issue, you keep them and figure that out later if you think this is the best chance to win your championship. But I'm going to keep looking at packages here, and I do want to hear yours. Normally I don't, but I'm so curious. I'm so curious what people think you could get. And please, don't be out there trying to get Shea, and don't be out there trying to get I don't know.
SGA is one I mentioned 2 years ago also. You got to recognize this stuff when these guys are on their way up, but anyway.
Yeah, and that's fair. Who knows what among that stuff you could actually do, but it's the same now, John. In a year from now, I don't want to hear about sign and trade, because if you're doing sign and trades, enjoy Evan Fournier coming back, because that's the kind of stuff you're getting back from at that point. Every year you wait on this, you're going to be getting a little bit less. So now's the time. This is it on Jalen. You got to figure out now, do you want to move him or do you want to keep him? And if you're keeping him, just to let everybody know, again, he's trade ineligible for a year, so you can't move him at all this year. Joe, you're keeping him. You're probably not firing him mid-season if things get off to a rocky start right now. So there really are some critical decisions right now, because if you get off to like a 2-10 start next year because things just aren't right internally, you're stuck at that point. So you to get your point, John, you do have to get ahead on this stuff if there are problems and there are things you need to address here. And maybe there aren't. Maybe we're overstating stuff, and maybe everyone's just pissed about a bad playoff loss here. But to hear over the last couple of days, we did great. This was awesome. Everything's fine. Man, I mean, I hope all you who didn't see the Brad thing in full go to the CLNS media channel and check it out in full today, because this was not
It was
what anyone
interesting.
wanted to hear. It was
It
not
was
what anyone
interesting.
wanted to hear.
Yeah, no, you did not get your pound of flesh here. So yeah, check it out. Go check out the presser. We're gonna wrap it. Thanks guys for hanging out with us again. Bobby Manning, John Zanis. This is the Garden Report. The Garden Report doesn't stop even though the Celtics season is over. So we will have more coverage of the Celtics offseason all summer long. So enjoy your
You
weekend,
excited for the
guys.
finals, Sean? Or are you just too bummed to even pay much
It's not
attention?
bummed. It's just, it takes the air out of your sails a little bit, but I'm excited to see how it is. I actually, I don't think it's going to be nearly as big a cakewalk as people are talking about, and it would not shock
That's
me.
all I can hope. Just be competitive.
It would not shock me at all if Miami won. Honestly, it wouldn't. But we'll see. Denver's offense, I don't know if you can scheme for it as well as you can the Celtics with what they were doing here. So, it's a really interesting situation here. But again, we are done, guys.